Podcast. Erik's Story, Part 3.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody, to today's episode of the Bar Podcast, powered by LDR Studios. Get out there, like us, find us, all that good jazz on the media world today. You can find us on Facebook at Building a Refuge. You can also find us on YouTube, which is pretty awesome, right, Erik?
That's right.
At Building a Refuge. And then more recently, you can find us at TikTok at Building a Refuge.
Thank you, Sydney.
As well, you can find us on Twitter, too. Just type in Building a Refuge, because we have kind of a messed up name on Twitter. But just type in Building a Refuge, and you can find us. So before we get rolling today, Erik, as we normally do, just shout out a couple of support roles or avenues anyways for folks out there that might be struggling. So, guys, listen up. You can text the word refuge to 494949. You can also utilize the National Suicide Awareness Hotline, I should say National Suicide Hotline, at 988, or you can also text them at 838-255. Thanks to all of our veterans. They have a helpline as well. The Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255. So, Erik, we are back, my friend.
Yes,
this is part 3.
Yes.
Of a pretty amazing story. I say amazing. I don't know if that's the right word. Challenging. But also, I think, very hopeful in what we've shared so far. So just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, this has really kind of started out in the early part of the 2000s, walking through your business, some of the, I think, challenges that not only you faced in that, but once you kind of walked through that, some pretty dark times that you went through.
Right.
And through that, I think you learned, I think, maybe a little bit about, folks listening to you, had some hope in there, got you out of a dark place that you were in, and then faced another pretty, I would say, big battle, uphill challenge with what kind of the ramifications were with some of the business anyways.
Yeah.
And that brought us up to really your time, I think, around 2012, where you reported to a federal prison.
Yes.
And had some experiences there. I think the last that we talked, I'm going to laugh a little bit about this because Chitty, your buddy in prison, I wish I'd get to meet the guy someday, but
maybe you will. He's
maybe
awesome dude.
Maybe leveled you out a little bit in terms of where you're at. So let's kind of catch folks up there, and I'm going to kick it back over to you for some more details.
Yeah, well, I think where we left off last time was us telling the story about how I was, in my mind, being fed and loving every minute of it is me going into prison to
you
help.
Thought you had a mission. You said you were on a mission from God, although that's a Blues Brothers steal, but I don't necessarily know if it was this kind of mission from God.
Yeah, so it was, and Chitty in a very brief but powerful conversation that he and I had, he set me straight.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was telling in the last podcast is the attitude that I went into prison with. Number one, I was obviously terrified.
Yeah.
But what I had allowed to be put in my mind, in my head, was that I was up here and everybody else, the other 500.
You didn't belong
guys,
there.
No, I didn't belong there.
Yeah.
No, I was going to be there for a brief stay, and this wasn't a part of my life, and I was going to, work my way through it and do it under God's heading, and then get out and go be with my family.
Yeah.
That was my mindset. And in that conversation with Chitty, where he told me the real reason that Paul was imprisoned for the sake of the gospel, and that I was in fact in prison for committing a felony, set me straight.
Yeah.
And like I said last time, it brought me from up here on my pedestal down here to where, and I'm not even down here, right there with them, eye to eye, to where I was. And that set a trajectory for the remainder of my time. I was sentenced to 21 months with federal time. You do 85% of it, so 18 months. And it set the trajectory for me to be able to kind of rest a little bit and not go in there with all these to-dos. And go in there with all this pressure and stress. And
that night he told you that, did you sleep good or did you sleep bad?
No, it was terrible. I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep, let's be honest. I didn't sleep good until I was there for probably a couple months.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wasn't right.
Yeah.
It just it's. I won't even get into explaining, how we were, how the dorms worked and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, it what that did for me was that kind of allowed me, and I told earlier that, you know, Chitty for the next couple weeks, you know, I said I was pissed at him because I had an agenda.
Yeah.
While I was there, and that agenda got thrown out the window with that one brief conversation. And so when we talked about that, you know, I'd talk about it with other people, and I'd still kind of keep the idea, the fact that maybe I can still do it, maybe I can still do that. Well, every once in a while on the chow line, Chitty would, you know, bump me in the shoulder and give me a little smirk, and you know, and he was wanting to talk to me, I found out later, but I wouldn't talk to him.
Yeah, you were mad at him.
Yeah, and it was a couple weeks later, we were at chow, and by that time, I had gotten acquainted with a couple of guys and real comfortable. And so we'd go a little bit early, and we'd hang out for 15, 20 minutes before we jumped in line and went and ate at the chapel. And so I'm sitting around the table at the chapel, and everybody else got up and left. And I had bent over and was grabbing something at underneath the table. And Chitty, right when came up above the table, he was sitting right across from me. He goes, Eric, I got one more thing to tell you. He goes, if you really know the story about Paul, he talks about not only why he was in prison for the sake of the gospel, but he was also the joy that he experienced while he was in prison. And that true joy, what he told me, that true joy is what I hope you find in the next 18 months of your year.
Yeah.
And that right there, like, that set the trajectory, like I said earlier, of my agenda, if you should call it that, of the next 18 months.
Yeah.
And what that took so much pressure off my shoulders, took so much. I started to get a little bit of a vision in regards to like what my next 18 months would look like.
Yeah.
Not only that, but it also allowed me to kind of not worry about that stuff and be able to worry about, okay, how do I mend the fences that I've torn down?
Yeah.
You know what? And my first priority obviously was my wife and my kids.
Yeah.
Like, what do I need to do as a dad? And the cool thing about it was those 12 guys, 13 guys that I started to hang out with in the chapel, you know, before chow and, you know, before breakfast and before lunch and dinner. Like, we started to gain a relationship, and we started to gain trust, and when I say these guys, like, it's weird in prison because, like, we're all wearing the same clothes. And so socioeconomically, you know, materialistically, like, you can't really judge. Like, I mean, you can kind of tell where people are from. You can kind of tell what their economic background is. But man, it's really hard to tell that.
Right.
And I never realized how big my freaking ego was. And how much pride I had in the fact of where I lived, you know, how much money I made, cars I had, all that materialistic crap. I never really realized how big of a root that had in my life. And it came out in that.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what does he do? What does he do? And that's one thing you don't ask in prison. What'd you do to get here?
Okay.
You don't
I
ask.
mean to laugh, but
you don't ask that question.
Yeah.
You don't do that.
Yeah.
And so, or how much time do you have left?
Right.
You don't ask that question.
Okay.
You just don't. And so, without having those two questions to ask of, what in the world do you talk about? So we got an opportunity to talk about what we were reading. You know, I got an opportunity to spend quite a bit of time in the Bible, quite a bit of time learning what I didn't know. And really dissecting it. But when that stuff in the Bible that I'm learning starts to become real life, like our day-to-day stuff that we're doing, or things that we have regrets for, or things that we've had joy in, then that group around you do start talking about life. You do start talking about, and you know it with your group that you guys get together with. It's like life starts to happen around you, and you make them aware of it, and that's how relationship starts.
I think you bring up a great point, though. I mean, I think, and listen, I'm only speaking from what I think, so my envisionment and all this probably is way the hell off base. But I think you bring up a great point in terms of what you explained around, you know, everybody's in the same clothes, everybody's on an equal playing field here, right? So there's no one, you know, one better, one higher, whatever than the other.
Right.
Which allows you to have those conversations kind of openly because you all are kind of in the same shoes,
Yeah.
no pun intended,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, and you had guys there, you know, the OGs had been there for 10, 15 years. You know,
Yeah.
you had guys that you knew had been there, and you could tell the way that guys respected them and the things that they did around there. But that group of 12, 13, I say 12 or 13 because there was guys that came in and came out, you know, while I was there. And, but we had a pretty solid core of about 10 to 12 of us that were there the whole time, at least I was there. And it ranged from a guy who was a really good business guy from Ohio. There was another guy who was a drug dealer from South Chicago. There was, I mean, I could go on and on and on about, you know, there was a guy that was a former mayor that was there. I mean, there's a guy that sold cars internationally that was there. And it's like all these different socio-economical backgrounds and all these different things and all these different pressures. And it literally, the conversations that we had all came down to guilt, shame, pride, and ego.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about. I mean, we started talking about other stuff, like, you know, how's your daughter doing, or how's your son doing, how's your marriage going, are you getting a divorce? I mean, there's several guys in our group that got divorce papers while I was there. Yeah. You know, and that's a tough thing to deal with.
So let me ask you this too, not to interrupt here, but I think it's probably a good spot for it. I mean, from a mental health perspective, like, I mean, I know you all were hanging out, right? And I think that when you can hang out in a common area, meaning you're all in the same kind of environment, right? From a building aspect, but you're all there kind of from that commonality as well. Yeah. But I mean, when you talk about like some of the things that even you mentioned before, you know, in your story about your pride, and you just mentioned this pride, ego, you know, things like that, right? That are meaningful to guys. Yeah. And, you know, and women too. But I mean, I think in terms of what we're talking about here, but, you know, guys for sure, you know, how did you deal with that mental health aspect of it? I mean, did you know about much of that when you were in there? No. Like, did you touch on any, like, hey, what's our mental health like being in here?
No, dude, I was just one day at a time. Yeah. Like, I literally was one day at a time. Because, you know, the other thing you don't do in prison is put a calendar up. Because time will just creep by. It creeps by anyway, but you don't put a calendar up, and you try not to remember what day it is, and you just try to, time becomes your enemy. Yeah. In that scenario. And from a mental health standpoint, I didn't know anything about anything. The only thing I knew was that 2-3 times a day, I felt this gut-wrenching pain that resonated through my whole body. And come to find out later on, that was just straight depression. Yeah. And I had been dealing with that. I mean, I hadn't eaten and slept in 3 years. Yeah. 4 years. Yeah. Really. And because of one thing or another. And so my body was just being destroyed from the inside out. And so while things progressed and things got a little bit better, like, people ask me all the time, man, when you reported to prison, that was probably the darkest day of your life. I was like, no, honestly, it was scary as hell. Yeah. But it was also very freeing. Yeah. Because that fear of the unknown was gone. At least I knew where I was at. Yeah. I knew that my family was safe. I knew things. Yeah. I knew there was no more unknowns. Yeah. And the worst days of this whole thing were from the time that I was in my basement until the time that I got sentenced. Because that was complete fear of the unknown. And fear of the unknown will crush you. Yeah. It will absolutely crush you. And so when you talk about mental health and I mean, really, it depends on what stage that we're talking about is where my mental health was at. And outsider looking in now, like I look back at my story and I can see it, like, and I can remember the feelings that I had. I can remember the pain in my bones, like in my joints. Yeah. That I felt when I would sit there and think about my wife and my kids. Yeah. I mean, you could physically feel it. Yeah. And I'd talk to these other guys, and like, there's a lot of them that couldn't read or write. Like, there's a lot of them that didn't have the educational background that I had. Yeah. And at least there was some kind of understanding of what I was going through. These guys, and when I say the things that these guys, I mean, when I was there, there was a guy there that lost his 2-year-old daughter. She passed away of leukemia while he was in prison.
Wow.
And they wouldn't allow him to go to the funeral. So we're walking through that shit with this guy.
Yeah.
And when you go through those, there's guys that got divorced, like I said. There's guys that dealt with tragedy. There was a guy that got his daughter got run over by a horse while we were in there. It's like, so when you walk through those things with those guys, you don't, and there's nobody trained around you.
Yeah.
You're not really
you're
clinically getting to the point.
Yeah.
But you're just talking it out. That's what, and that's really what we needed.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think it is a lot different. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot different in what we're doing here, right? Versus what you experienced in that environment,
It's just heightened.
Yeah,
it's just heightened.
But I mean, in terms of sharing, right? And that's what the great thing, that the outcomes of this, one story at a time, right? Really, truly is. And I'm grateful, right? That you have shared a big part of your life. You know what I mean? Going through that experience with your business.
Yeah.
Talking about the depression and everything that kind of was associated with it when you lost it. And then now this happens, right?
Yeah.
All in knowing, and I think you brought this up too, all in knowing that you, from a foundation perspective, you even thought, hey man, I got a pretty good foundation in Christ back then.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and that's until something really kicks you in the ass. Something really kicks you in the ass.
Yeah. And I used to get, I wouldn't say pissed, but I'd be like, whatever, man. Like people used to tell me you got to be brought to your knees in order to see him for who he is.
Yeah.
And I thought I had a relationship. I've gone to church. I went to the Methodist church growing up every Sunday.
Yeah.
It was there. In high school, go out and party the night before and go hungover to church.
Yeah.
We went. You had to go. And so I thought I knew it. I thought I knew who God was. I thought I had a relationship. I thought all that stuff. And when you have 24 hours in a day and nothing to do, you find things to do, and you also are left with your thoughts.
Yeah.
And I was left with my thoughts, and that's one of the biggest consequences to my actions and getting me put in prison.
Yeah.
Was the fact that I was left with my thoughts, and that's a dangerous thing. But the root of those Sunday school classes, the root of all that stuff, was at least I had a little bit of a working knowledge of what or who I was trying to communicate with, and or who I was trying to gain a relationship with. And so when my thoughts, I would go through it, and at different times it would hit me at different. Like I could be like, we had a basketball. I played a lot of basketball. I was in there, and there were times where I'd be shooting hoops by myself or whatever, and it would just freaking hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
And it would just, the guilt and the shame would just bury me.
Yeah.
And I'd literally have to walk off the court and sit on the bench and be like, and just deal with it.
Right.
And where out in the outside world, we could distract ourselves with something else.
Yeah.
We could go watch TV, or we could go do this or go that, go drink, go do drugs, go do however you deal with your stuff.
Yeah.
There was nowhere else to turn other than deal with my shit that I had rolling around in my head.
Yeah.
And I had one choice. I could either deal with it, or I could bury it and it could destroy me.
Yeah.
And I knew it would destroy me because I saw what it did to me when I tried to bury it back in my basement.
Yeah.
And so I was never going back there again.
Yeah.
I was never going back to that feeling of darkness ever again.
Yeah.
And so those little bits of time that I got to talk with Doug and got to talk to my wife, and as I led into prison, there were several other guys that came into my life where I was able to be transparent and honest with them about what's going on. Not the fluff, like top layer stuff, the real nitty gritty of what's going on and what's happening in my life. That transposed itself into that group of 12 guys.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's literally the model of building a refuge.
Yeah.
And that's
you're right.
That is exactly what we're trying to do, and it's difficult on the outside world.
It is.
Just because of the other distractions.
Yeah.
But there was a time for a couple months where things were just running smooth. I mean, when I say smooth, they were good. Yeah. They were good. I had a routine. I was playing basketball. I was working out. Best shape of my life I've ever been in. I was working on my relationship with my wife. I was, the kids were coming to visit. They'd come and visit me like once every couple weeks.
Yeah.
So we were rolling, and I was like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah.
I finally settled in, and we can do this. Then an incident happened where my old boss came and visited me. and my boss that I had right before I came into prison. And he drove a silver car. Well, the prison I was at, the camp that I was at, didn't have any fences. We were just surrounded by cliffs.
Okay.
There's this big valley and these cliffs. Well, these guys would have their family members or friends or whatever throw stuff down this valley and back in where the softball fields were with stuff in it. You know, drugs or alcohol or you know, I mean, shit, you name it, socks, you know, anything.
Yeah.
Anything you can think of that you don't normally get when you're in prison.
Right.
And so they'd make runs. That's what they call it. And so in the middle of the night, they'd run out of the dorms and go for a run and get stuff. Well, it's usually the people that come on a visit that bring stuff and they throw stuff down the thing and then they come around to the visit. That's usually the way it happened.
Okay.
So they saw on a camera a silver car doing a drop, and they thought it was my boss that was doing a drop for me.
Yeah.
And so I got thrown in the shoe. I got taken out of my visit, and the shoe is standard the segregated housing unit. So I got thrown in real prison. I got taken across the street to the higher level security, the medium level security, and thrown in I don't know, it was like 6x10, all stainless steel. I mean, the real prison.
Holy crap.
Real prison.
I don't think you've ever shared that with me.
Yeah. And so I come out of there and they immediately take you, and there's no communication to my wife. There's no communication to my family. There's no nothing. I'm gone. And I'm thinking in my mind, because when you do stuff like that, you usually get shipped to another facility and you go up in a security level. So I'm thinking, holy hell, like they've admit I didn't do this. I'm trying to tell everybody I didn't do it.
Yeah, like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and they're like,
hear it every day.
Hear it every day, yeah. And so I'm in there for 8 days, and I don't know. I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to stay here by myself for 90 days, and then I'm going to get shipped God knows where. Who knows? Well, in that 8 or 9 day period, my wife is at home, has no idea what's happened to me. I talk to her every night. Wow. I call her every night.
Yeah.
Or email her every day.
She hadn't heard from you in 8 days.
8 days.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, and so she is writing me emails. I'm not getting them, obviously, because I'm stuck in there for 23 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I'm writing her, you know, the golf pencils?
Yeah.
I had a golf pencil, and I had 6 sheets of paper. And I still, to this day, have those 6 sheets of paper. Wow. My writing is that thin. And I'm telling her what's going on, and I'm telling her my mindset. And if you want to read a mental health documentary, or I don't know what that would be, like a diary entry, whatever it is, all you got to do is read through that 6 pages front and back, and it'll tell you exactly where my head was for 8 days in a solitary confinement. And it was, when I say it was real prison, it was straight chaos. And the lights went off, screams, moans, banging on the stuff. It was probably 50 degrees, 60 degrees in my thing. I was freezing cold, slept on a thing that was this big. I mean, it was real prison. And I remember one time we got let out an hour a day. And when I say we got let out into what was basically like a dog kennel, these large dog kennels. And it was just separate sheets or separate sections of fencing. And the wall went up like 30 feet. So all you could see was the clouds. So because I was from the camp, I never had a roommate, and I never got put in one of those fenced areas with anybody else because I was from the camp. So they put me in there, and then they brought all these other guys in there. You know, I mean, we're talking bad dudes.
Yeah.
And one day I got taken out there, and I got put in this dog kennel that I call it. And then the guys next to us, they started bringing them in. Well, they brought this clean cut guy. He had a couple tats or whatever, and they have you handcuffed behind your back, and then they have you put them through they put you in the thing, close the door, then they have you put your handcuffs out the door through a little slot, and they uncuff you. Mm-hmm. They didn't uncuff that guy. And I was like, well, I wonder why they didn't uncuff that guy. 5 minutes later, they bring 6 other dudes that were from a gang, same nationality, gang, bring them in, uncuff them, and they beat that guy to a pulp right in front of me. I'm 1 fence away from right in front of me. And when I say, and they let him beat him up for probably what seemed like, it was probably 4 or 5 minutes. It seemed like a half an hour. Oh my God. And when I say, and they're bouncing his head off the concrete, they're doing, I mean, and so I experienced like what real prison is all about in those days.
That's crazy.
So they took me back up. They cleared that out, cleaned that up, brought me back up to my cell. And a day later, I get called into the office of the head guy there. And he said, hey, we just wanted to, and what they were doing, they're fishing for information. They're like, hey, we want to know about this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. I'm like, I don't know anything about those guys.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't hang out with those guys. They're in my dorm. They're in my unit.
Right.
But I don't know anything about them. So they were fishing for stuff that I might know before they told me that they knew it wasn't me.
Oh, Lord.
And that I was going to get to go back to the camp.
Ugh.
And that whole time I was angry, I was pissed, I was mad. I was like, I didn't do it. Why in the world is this happening to me? Well, so I'm about 8 months into my stay there.
Okay.
And for the next month, I got to reconcile that whole thing. And I got to have conversations with the guys, because there's some guys in there that they had actually been to the shoot, so they understood what I was talking about. And they understood what I'd lived through for the last 9 days. There's some guys in there, they do their whole damn bit there.
Ugh.
And it's inhumane. And so we would talk through that. And what I came to find out later down the road is there's a reason why I was in there. Because that's a different level of compassion for the men who are actually in there.
Yeah.
That I would never have had had I not experienced that. There's a lot of guys in there that belong there, but there's a lot of guys in there that do not belong where they're at. Yeah. And so, we're not going to get on that rant and rave. That maybe is another podcast. But right. it gave me a level of compassion for those guys that were across the road in a completely different life scenario for God only knows how long. Right. And so and I got an opportunity, obviously, to come back and communicate to my wife, and ended up mailing her those letters, and I got all her emails, while she was there. Yeah. And it was so surreal to like match them up, match the letters up to the emails, and where our minds were at, and how it went from total panic to total like scared, to all of a sudden just letting go of it and being like, okay, whatever's going to happen here is going to happen for a reason. And by the last couple pages of that stuff that I wrote down, it was like I was completely free of it. Yeah. Like I was free of whatever had just happened here. And I was able to not rest, because there is no rest there, but to just be okay with whatever was going to happen. Yeah. And then 2 days later, I'm released and back at the camp, which felt like I was in friggin' Disneyland. I mean, it was unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, oh man. But it was good. And then so, then we fast forward, once we're past that, story, and I kind of get through that little traumatic event, we just basically cruised our way, and I developed some really, really strong relationships, some really good guys that I still communicate with to this day. Yeah. There's 3 or 4 of them that I still talk to, that are spread throughout the country. I said earlier, that's really where the idea of building a refuge started. Yeah, the seed got planted. Totally see that. The seed got planted, and the natural thing for all of us guys who were involved in, if you want to call it prison ministry, it was just a group of guys. I got who were trying to get through it and learn more about God. But like, the natural thing for a lot of those guys when they got out was, when they'd write us back, was they were getting involved in prison ministry outside. Yeah. And so it was kind of, I just was like, okay, when I get out of here, when I was starting to develop my plan, it was like, okay, what am I going to do for a living? What am I going to do for income? What's it going to be like when I go back and spend time with my wife? What's it going to be like with the kids? How are they going to accept me? Yeah. And then the other thing was, okay, when am I going to fit this prison ministry thing in here that I'm supposed to do? And I got out, and it was May of 2014 is when May 8th, 2014 is when I was released. And it's really cool, because they have this tradition where your buddies, they walk you to the door as far as you can go. Mm-hmm. And I remember the day that they walked me there, and it sounds really crazy, but there was a little bit of me that didn't want to leave.
I was going to ask you about that. Like, I mean, just in terms of like, how do I face the I don't want to say free world, but how do you face civilian world?
Well, and I was only gone for 18 months. There were some of the guys in there I know that have been down for 10, 20, years.
Yeah, but I mean that's probably a pretty general question, right? But I mean, you're facing your wife, your kids, your family, your friends.
Yeah.
You know, to tell. You know, now it's like, okay, you know, you're going to get a million questions, right? I mean, that's we know this. You and I know this now. Like that's a whole mental health.
Yeah.
You know. Snag all in itself, right?
And that was a little bit of that fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
But because of what I traveled through and my family had traveled through before.
Yeah.
We were able to deal with it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And what I had learned in the last 18 months about who I am.
Yeah.
And what I'm there for.
So you ask a question. I'm going to ask you this right now. Is that your identity?
Prison?
Yeah.
Hell no.
You know I'm asking.
Hell no. No.
Yeah.
It's a part of my story.
Yeah.
And I don't. I was a little nervous about telling it.
Yeah.
Just because, like, there's some people at work that don't know my story. There's a lot of people in my life that do know it.
Yeah.
And it's as if they didn't even know it because they don't treat me any different.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what it would be like when people from work, listen to this and see what happens.
I can tell you this. I know in what we've been doing over the past 6 years, just about now, 5 years for sure, right? 2018, 19, it's just, I'm not good at math, but somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll be humble. I know you'll call me at some point in time and be like, dude, you won't believe I just got a call from, or you won't believe that this person just called and shared this with me.
Yeah.
I know that by now from what we've been doing so far. That shit happens, man.
Well, it'll shock us in the moment, but when we sit back and look at it, we'll be like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's what's supposed to happen. And it already has.
Yeah.
I mean, since I've been out since 2014, which we're darn close to 10 years.
Yeah.
It has been 10 years since I reported.
Yeah.
But, there have been, those guys that came into my life that had walked in my shoes 10 years prior.
Yeah.
I'm able to do that now.
Yeah.
And it's so, I've said this in our intro podcast, is that one of the gifts that I think I've been given is that when we sit down and talk to guys who are really hurting and they're right in the middle of their crap.
Yeah.
You can see, if they exercise that opportunity to be transparent and let go of some of that stuff and let go of that pride and let go of the ego, if they choose to do that, the hope that's at the end of that thing.
Right.
Where they're going.
Yeah.
You know what is going to happen.
That's right.
You just know, because those things are literally evil.
Yeah.
And I still have it. I still, all that stuff started over when those guys walked me out.
Yeah.
When they walked me to the door, all that stuff started over.
Yeah.
The same feelings, the scared to death, all the regret, all that stuff all came flooding back.
Yeah.
But I was able to battle that a little bit different.
Yeah.
It still hurt. It still had my days where I couldn't eat, still had my days where I couldn't sleep. How in the hell am I going to support my family?
Yeah.
All this stuff. It's all there. But when I walked out and I was processed out, and my wife handed me my clothes and I gave my kids a hug and my wife a hug, that all just for a moment flooded away.
Oh yeah.
Because it was like, okay, we made it.
Yeah.
We made it.
All you got, everything you have is right here.
Yeah. That's all I needed.
Yeah.
And somehow, some way, just like my wife and I walked through it and we got through the prison piece of it, we're going to get through this next chapter together.
Yeah.
And she was confident in it. I was confident in it. My kids, were a year and a half older.
Mm-hmm.
They had visited me. They've seen me in the prison garb. They've seen Dad at his worst.
Yeah.
And now, like I've said in previous, conversations, like what we have been able to utilize that from a parenting situation, from a marriage situation, it runs the gamut in regards to what issues we dealt with back here that we are able to utilize going forward.
Yeah.
And we immediately, right out of, when I got out of prison, I thought I was going to report to the halfway house and get sent home because I still had a little bit of time left until July.
Okay.
To be on house arrest. And I thought that what they told me at the prison was I was go check in the halfway house because that's where they run everything from. And then you go back to your house and you start your time in your house and you get ankle monitor and all that stuff. And Well, I got to the halfway house and they said, no, you have to stay here. I had no clothes. I had no nothing.
Was that in Indiana or was
yeah,
that?
It was downtown Indianapolis.
Okay.
And she's like, no, you're slated to stay here. And I was like, for how long? And they said, well, till July. I'm like, no
This
way.
is a month, like almost 2 months.
Just completely crushed.
Yeah.
Like, I finally was, on the way home. We were talking about it for 5 hours.
Yeah,
on the way home,
yeah.
what are we going to do and all that stuff. And I had to stay. And that's another, just like I had to go into the shoe.
Yeah.
There's another reason why I was put in that halfway house.
Yeah.
I got to see a whole nother side of the prison system that is so jacked up you can't even believe it.
Yeah.
How jacked that is. But the halfway house I was there for a week, and then they finally let me go. They realized they messed up, got the paperwork, and then they sent me back.
Yeah.
But do you know that one of the guests that we'll have on this podcast, my good friend Rusty,
Yeah.
he was the first one that visited me in the halfway house.
Yeah.
And I got to
Not a
download.
surprise.
And again, you talk about downloading, you talk about transparency, you talk about getting stuff off your chest.
Yeah.
We sat in the mall food court in downtown Indianapolis, and he let me download all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he felt it, like regret and fear and all those different things. And
Probably some anger too, right? I mean,
well, no. I was angry at myself.
Yeah.
I did it.
Yeah.
I was angry at it. Didn't have to be that way.
Did it take long though to get past that part of it, Eric? I mean, because you and I've talked about this before, and I think, matter of fact, I've asked you this about, to you this before, but I mean, in terms of what you did, I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, I'm probably putting it on levels now, right? But I mean, it's not like you were embezzling bazillions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
Or doing this or that. I understand there's a law and you can't do what you did, right? And so we all know that. But
right.
I mean, how did you because you probably had some anger around some of that, I would presume anyways.
I was angry at myself.
Yeah.
Like I said.
Yeah.
I couldn't be angry at the system.
Yeah.
I was angry at the prison system once I got in there and found out what it's really all about.
Yeah.
It's messed up. But when it came to what I did or where I was at, the only thing I had to do was blame me.
Yeah, I got you.
It was me. It was on me. And because it didn't have to be, there was other choices I could have made.
Yeah.
But what I also learned is I'm not a sum of my choices.
Yeah. Amen.
That's not at all who I am.
That's right.
And so those, and I still, sometimes, I mean, it's become less frequently, but I still think back to those people that lost money with me. I still think back to the relationships that are gone. I've got several friends that I've lost.
Yeah.
And it hurts.
Yeah.
Like it hurts. And I when I got out, I had a list.
Yeah.
That I wanted to reach out to people and apologize and say I'm sorry. There's some that would talk to me, and there's some that wouldn't.
Yeah.
And I had to get to a point where I accepted that and moved forward.
Yeah.
Because I can't live like that and expect to prosper going down the road and the people around me to prosper from having a relationship with me.
Yeah.
Because if I'm consistently going back to this, and that's why I don't like. I used to talk about my story a lot, and when I first came out of prison, I would spend 75% of my time, in my talking about prison and what happened in prison.
Yeah.
And the other 25% talking about hope.
Yeah.
That's completely flipped itself on its rear end.
Yeah.
And now I'll give you the story. I'll tell you what happened because it's part of my life. It's part of my family's life.
Sure.
And what we went through, because there's a whole nother side of this of my wife's, what she went through.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that
She
too.
got the sentence. I didn't.
Yeah.
Dude, I worked out, played ball. I got as healthy as I've ever been.
Yeah.
And all the while, she's having to pay the bills. I mean, on paper, we were homeless.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way
Yeah.
without the support of people around us that she would have ever made it through that.
Yeah.
And that's a whole another podcast. It's a whole beautiful story about the people who have come around us and supported us when I got home and while I was gone.
But I think it's a great point, man. I mean, I think, and especially with what we're doing and you sharing this and, our goal and mission, right, to create hope and as best we can, right, through these stories.
Yeah.
Is exactly that, right? I mean, every story that we're going to hear is going to be pretty challenging, or it's going to be a shitty experience for somebody going through something.
Yeah.
Who knows what it is? We've talked
pain.
about it, right? It's pain, right? And no matter what it is. But I think in terms of, we hear this a lot, zoom out, right?
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
But to zoom out and kind of see the big picture versus, it's kind of just what's in front of you right now.
Yeah.
That is the hardest thing. I haven't experienced anything like what you've walked through. But just in what I have experienced, it's very hard to see past your hand right in front of your face. I mean, it's just the most difficult thing in the world.
Right.
And it's taken a lot of time. But once you can, and maybe sometimes it's just little glimpses here and there, right? But once you can, man, it just gives you a different perspective.
Yeah.
Like the light looks different. You know what I mean? And I think that's what's cool about this. I mean, you certainly display that in what you're sharing through this experience. But I mean, I've gotten it right. I mean, I've heard it a few different times. There's some details I haven't heard. But I think that's what I get from it, man. I mean, you've changed that lens, you've changed that perspective. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean that it still didn't happen. Doesn't mean any of that. Doesn't mean still you probably have those thoughts sometimes, right? Yeah. But yet you still have a lot of hope. Like I know that from you.
That's all I have.
Yeah.
I have to have that.
Yeah.
Like that is when you experience hopelessness at its rawest level, right before you're ready to take your life.
Yeah.
When you experience that, and you never want to go back there.
Yeah.
Like you search and you search and you search, and my problem was I searched and searched and searched, but until I was able to spend some time just alone by myself. Yeah. That's when he found me. Yeah. And he was always there. Yeah. Like he was always there for me. I just the world became this big thing, and I wanted so many different things. And, do I want nice things for my family now? Of course I do. Yeah, I got you. Of course I do. Yeah. But money and material things look a lot different to me. Yeah. Like you said, that different lens. Yeah. Because it almost is like I'm a little nervous about it. Like I hear you, man. Because where I know it took me. Yeah. And so now, like when we're talking to guys, and like I said, I've got that, I've been given, I think, that gift of looking forward for those guys. Mm-hmm. It's like, you have to be careful with that though, because you have to recognize their pain. Yeah. Just like Doug did with me. Yeah. He probably saw the other side of it while he was sitting there talking to me. Yeah. If you do this, if you let it go and allow him to be a part of it, then you will experience this. And he probably knew that. Yeah. But he allowed me to share my pain. Yeah. And that's the part of it. And if there's anything that anybody gets from all this stuff I've been saying for 3 episodes, it's the fact that you have to start somewhere. Yeah. And if you are one of those guys, or even women who are listening to this stuff, and you're holding things in, I can assure you that it will destroy you. Oh yeah. It will. Yeah. It will eat you from the inside out. Yep. And at the soonest time that you can, even if it's those numbers that we read at the beginning, at the end, end of whoever it is, get it off your plate. Yeah. Get it off your shoulders. Get it out and let it be known. Yeah. And what I can assure you, whatever it is, it can be dealt with. Yeah. Yeah. And the people in your life. Now, some of us have more than others. Some of us maybe can't think of that person that would come into their life. There are a dozen people in my life right now that weren't even in my life while I was walking through this stuff. Right. You had no idea I was going through this stuff. Yeah. No, I mean, you're in my life every day now. I mean, I think that's the crazy part about how, and I don't want to fast forward here too much, but we're at that time, you're post prison, you and this is now going into 2015, right? Probably latter part of 2014, part of 15. Yep. I mean, that is almost where you and I start to merge together, right? I mean, well, and it all started by me telling my story. Yeah. It's exactly right. To a bunch of 100% correct. To a bunch of people that I didn't really even know. Do you remember when you and Jen told that story? The one it was probably middle of 2015. Because I know when I heard it,
and I probably should have listened to it, or I don't even should, but Rusty provided it to me
Yeah.
a little earlier.
Yeah.
And I just blew it off like, whatever, I'll listen to it. And so I know it had to be probably in the latter part of 14 or early part of 15 anyways.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the craziest part about all this, man, is that like when you were coming through that period of time in life and you shared it, just like what you just said, you guys were open enough to share it. And I remember it distinctly.
That's the first time Jen and I told our story together.
Ever.
Like she it was usually just, hey, Eric, will you tell your story?
Yeah.
And I at that time I had told it several times,
right,
at church events and some of these different stuff. But that was the first time, and Rusty, God bless him, asked if the both of us could come, because he wanted Jen's side too.
Yeah.
And what I would love, and I'm hoping it'll happen sometime soon.
Yeah.
I want men to hear her side.
Oh yeah.
I want them to hear your wife's side of what they went through.
I think MC Clark A might be able to make that happen. I mean, I know a guy or a couple of guys, right?
You might.
He says he might.
Well,
that's right. And this is not the He-Man Woman Haters Club, correct?
It is not.
It's not.
No.
But I think men's health gets swept under the rug more than any other mental health issue.
Yeah.
That's because women talk about it.
That's right.
We won't open our mouths.
No.
And that's what I said earlier. Like, if there's anything that you get from this thing, just start one place.
Yeah.
Like, text 4949, refuge to 4949.
Yeah. I mean, and it works.
Dude,
I mean, it really works.
I am living proof that transparency will save you.
Oh, yeah.
Will save your life.
Yeah.
And because if I didn't have that experience with Doug, if I didn't have that experience with my wife, if I didn't have the daily phone calls that I have with you, I don't know where I'd be.
Yeah, and I think it's man, here's the other thing. I mean, it's just it's crazy to me because like how we came together. Obviously, I mean, I've shared and I'm sure folks have heard. Hopefully, they've heard anyways. Maybe they listened in to the story. But I mean, I went through a pretty angry period of time. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I didn't want to talk to anybody. Yeah. I mean, I was like, fuck the world, man. I'm done. I don't do that bullshit, right? I'm like, I thought I was muscling my way through the world, and then I was like, really, like, I'm muscling my way through this fucking thing because I'm done, right?
Yeah.
Until I heard your story. Yeah. and I mean, and we hadn't talked, like we said, man, we hadn't talked in 16 years. Yeah. That's nuts.
Yeah. But what you didn't have the benefit of was you were dealing with the loss of your brother.
Yeah.
While dealing with everything else you had in the world.
Oh yeah.
You had pressures from pulling at you from every direction.
Oh yeah.
Being a dad, being a husband, financially,
and staying strong, like being the one that had to. I mean,
you led your family through.
I mean, I had to. It's right.
Yeah. And so you had all that. Now, look at my situation.
Yeah.
Look what God did for me.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to look at it, I look at prison as a gift.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard.
That's a dumbass thing to say.
But I'm sure there's other guys out there that probably would tell you that.
It's a gift to me. Because I was able to spend time alone with him.
Yeah.
And I was able to sift through my stuff. But I didn't have, of course, I talked to my wife and I know the struggles financially she was having. But then all of a sudden, boom, like somebody would, I mean, literally, dude, we had like checks show up in the mail. Like we didn't even know people.
Yeah.
They had heard our story. They had heard what we had been through. We'd heard what we walked through. And then all of a sudden, we got our refrigerator's empty and there's a $500 check.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you explain that? How do you explain that? And the gift that I was given was time.
Yeah.
Time was, if you looked at it from a sense of prison, time was my enemy.
Yeah.
But time was a gift for me because I had 18 months to sift through that stuff so that when I came out, I was solid in the fact of what my purpose was. I was talking a little bit earlier about, everybody that came out from my group just felt this sense to go back and give back to the prison. So they'd all go back into prison ministry.
Right.
Here's how funny God is. My first job out of prison was with a company in Pendleton, which is north of Indianapolis.
I remember this, dude.
Directly across from the state prison, a giant state prison. And and like I had every opportunity in the world to go over at my lunchtime or after
Yeah.
or before work and do prison ministry.
Yeah.
I never felt the tug to go do that.
Yeah.
And there was guilt and shame and all that stuff. I'm like, why don't I feel the need to go do that? What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
I've got 2 or 3 other guys that are out there and they're doing it and they're going full bore.
Yeah.
One of them even developed a career in it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, is there something wrong with my heart? Like, did I really get out of prison what I thought it was?
Yeah.
And no, it's not the fact. What he did was he let me understand the fact that I want to get to them before they go to prison.
Right. Yeah.
I want to talk to guys who are screwing up, making bad choices, doing things. They're in dark places and things are going wrong in their lives before they make a stupid decision that's going to land them in prison for 18 months away from their families. I want to talk to them about that.
Yeah.
I want to talk to them about the fact that not only what I went through, but the fact that I realize and know what your pain is.
Yeah.
I understand my situation might not be exactly like it is,
Yeah.
but I know your pain.
Yeah.
I know what that feels like to be on an island by yourself. I know what that's like to be in a dark place to the point where you just want to end it.
Yeah.
So there's really, because of the guys that I was around and the demographics and the people and the places where they were from,
Yeah.
there's really nobody that you could sit in front of me that I couldn't relate to.
Yeah.
Because I heard their stories.
Right.
I know my story. I know what they're going through.
We've heard a lot of stories. Yeah.
Yeah, and I got 20 other
Yeah.
stories
Yeah.
that I could tell that happened to me in that 18 months.
Yeah.
And that's what he gave me. He gave me stories. And that's what I want to make sure that these guys know, is that eventually at some point in some time, your testimony, your story
Yeah.
will not only help to change you,
Yeah.
but it'll change others.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have examples of it, I don't know, time and time again, man, where we have self-doubted even what we're doing here at Building
Yeah.
a Refuge,
Yeah.
and then some random person comes walking in.
Clark, for example.
Well, MC Clark A. Yeah, absolutely that.
Yeah.
But I mean, even, we've had other folks walk in, man, and they're like, you guys don't stop doing this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
we've talked about this before where we're like, man, we don't have 100 people show up, or we don't
Yeah.
have however many people in our mind we think we should have at a meeting or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I do remember that one day when that lady said that to us. I'm like, I don't care, man. I don't give a damn if I'm the only dude that shows up
Right.
here at Harley Davidson on a Sunday
Right.
or a Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm just going to come and hang out for 3 hours, and whoever wants to come, come.
And that's reality. Like those thoughts will creep in your head.
Yeah.
Like the doubt, the ego, the pride, those are all there.
Yeah.
But it's all about how you're going to combat it.
Yeah.
And are you going to do it in your own strength? Or are you
Yeah.
going to do it? Are you going to rely on something else?
Yeah.
And that's just the choice that I've made.
Yeah.
And the fact and the choice that you've
Yeah.
made is
And
to rely on something else.
I think that's,
'Cause I can't do it.
it's another point to all of this that, I think we have to think about, right? Is it's okay, right? It's okay. I mean, if you have good days, bad days are in other, man,
Yeah. Yeah, it happens.
Yeah. It happens.
I mean, it's there are goods and bads.
Yeah.
And there are valleys and mountaintops.
Yeah.
And it's just how you're going to deal with them.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, it's been a journey.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just it, man. I mean, it's a journey that we're on, and I know when you and I came back together again and we started to think about this and what it really looked like. I mean, it just felt right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I got a lot of energy out of the fact like I could just come and hang out, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? And
Yeah.
be a part of something different than anything that I've really experienced before in the past.
Yeah. And I know, and I'm realistic in the fact that I will never create, I will never create.
Yeah.
That moment in my life with those group of guys,
Yeah.
I can't. That can't be correlated. That can't be the same out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just can't.
Right.
Because there's other pressures, other stressors that we didn't have to deal with in here,
Yeah.
and so it won't. But it can be real.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, not just talking about fluff stuff.
Yeah.
It can be real, and that's what this was.
Yeah.
It was real.
Yeah.
Like it was, and it was. I'm having a shitty day, or I'm having a great day,
Yeah.
and you celebrate it, or you walk along with them in,
Yeah.
in their crappy days.
Yeah. And I mean,
And that can happen here.
That's the cool part about, I think what we've learned in this is that, it's okay to have a shitty day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I
can have
think the world is kind of, I don't know. I could probably have a whole podcast on just that. But I mean, what we've learned is certainly that, between the pressures of what you should be, what you need to be, all this other bullshit, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think like where we're at right now, man, is just such a unique place and creating an environment that is non-threatening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And your story, Erik, I mean, it is a story of hope, dude. I mean, it still blows me away though, when you zoom out of this thing and you look at it from 100,000 foot level in, man, it blows me away and it doesn't blow me away. Right? I mean, I think from what I've learned, and I asked you this a while ago, was that your identity? And you laughed and said, absolutely not. Hell no, it's not my identity, right? And, for anybody that's listening out there, we always will tell you this, man. What I've learned in my belief system is there's no timeline, there's no pressure, there's no expectation, there's none of that, right? Yeah. And I think that's what has brought me closer to it. Because once I realized that there's not an expectation on it, it allowed me to be exactly what you just talked about a little while ago, and that is be transparent, be vulnerable, be open, be all those things. Yeah. Because I think even as a guy, we tend to put a lot of expectations on ourselves. Mm-hmm. And look, man, I'm not saying every day is just great. Yeah. Right? I mean, I have them. I have work challenges. I got, real life challenges. I get myself involved into a lot of shit that puts a lot of pressure on me, right? Yeah. So, but hearing stories like this, I mean, stories that are real, man. Like I'm probably biased because I know you. You know what I mean? And so hearing this is like it probably takes me a little bit of a step back, but I trust that, man, somebody out there will hear it and connect to it.
And there's a decision that you have to make, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I could tell you until you're blue in the face that it will work. Yeah. I could tell you that transparency builds the kingdom. I could tell you that.
Yeah, that's right.
But until you experience it for yourself, until you make a decision to be transparent, you can't experience it. No. It just and that's the piece of that is the most important. And I've said it twice already. It's that first step. Yeah. And whatever that step is, take it. Yeah. That's the first one. And there are a lot of things in men's lives that people don't know what's going on in men's lives. Yeah. And there are people that you should and shouldn't talk to. Right. There's also, you got to be careful in how you do that. And so reach out to us, and all I can do is share. I was lucky that somebody came in my path. Yeah. I absolutely 100% realize that I was lucky. Yeah. But I also know that there are people out there that men in their minds think won't care. Yeah. That they actually do. Yeah. They do.
Well, look, man, I mean, it's like I said, parts of this I hadn't heard, parts of this I had heard. And the parts that I haven't heard certainly filled some of those gaps. And I think that my hope is that other people hear this. Check us out, right? We do host meetings. For those that are listening in the Indianapolis area anyways, and at Harley-Davidson of Indianapolis, we host meetings. Yeah. Come and hang out, man. I mean, MC Clark, that's where we met you. And you weren't shopping for a Harley.
No.
And we're grateful for that, man. So grateful. MC Dustin, we love that guy. He's around here somewhere. I don't know where he's at. But, I mean, seriously, that's just, I hate to say that's as easy as it is. We don't try to complicate things. Yeah. I mean, we're a little clunky at times, but I think that's the, authenticity of it, the organicness of it that we talked about earlier, that, maybe that's a little bit of the fun of it, right? Yeah. Because, we're not perfect, right? This thing isn't going to be a super shiny ball. It might look like a rusty Chevy with a kick-ass engine, right? That's right. Or a Mustang, one of the two. But,
that's right.
But yeah, come and check us out. Folks can check us out on Facebook. We're going to be releasing, or have released a lot of great information so far over the past few months, and we're going to continue to do that. And I just appreciate you sharing, Erik. It's quite a story for sure.
Well, to say the least. Hopefully, people see it as a story of hope. I do. Yeah. And it's just a living testimony to our story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, folks, listen, if you need help, as Erik mentioned a little bit ago, we mentioned at the front end and back end of every podcast that we do, you can reach out by text to 494949 if you text the word refuge. You can also reach out to the National Suicide Helpline. You can text the 988, or you can also reach out, dial 988, that is, or text the number 838-255, and the Veterans Crisis Line as well, because that's super important, as we know. Yep. You can reach out to 1-800-273-8255. But we appreciate everybody here at LDR. Appreciate your story, Erik, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks, man.